Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Wednesday afternoon session as part of Cyberweek 2023. This is our 25th annual Cyberweek, and the conversations have been incredibly stimulating so far, but I feel like we have under-devoted attention to arbitration, and we are about to remedy that in this conversation. And we've got a great panel of experts who have their hands on many different parts of the elephant. So can I ask the panelists today to introduce themselves just quickly, say a little bit about yourself, and then I think Damini is going to be kicking us off. But Damini, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hi, everybody. I'm Damini. I'm a recent law graduate, and I manage content for Arbitrate.com. So happy to be here and excited.
Thank you so much, Damini. Neil, how about you?
Yes, hello. Well, good to see everyone again. I can't believe it's almost been a year since we had the last one. So I'm an attorney from India, and as most of you know, I'm working at ODR.com with Colin and Damini, and looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, Neil is on the front lines of building some of these OR, online arbitration platforms. So I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Ron, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ron Dolin. I'm I guess a lawyer and engineer by training, and focus on search. And I'm trying to help apply AI to various aspects of dispute resolution.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Ron is our Chief Innovation Officer at ODR.com. So he's experimenting with some pretty cutting edge, cool stuff. And Sophie, please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Sophie Nappert. I'm an arbitrator. I'm Canadian, based in London, and I have in 2021 founded ArbTech, which you can find at arbtech.io, which is a platform that seeks to educate and foster discussion on how technology, including AI, impacts arbitration and dispute resolution more widely.
Excellent. And I hope we hear more about ArbTech over the course of this panel because you've been doing excellent work. But Damini, why don't I hand it to you, and you can kick us off with a couple observations about sort of the current state of where we are with AI and arbitration. So please.
Let me just share my screen. Give me one moment.
Perfect. We see it.
Okay. So hi, everybody, and so excited to explore how AI is reshaping arbitration and what lies ahead of us. For the next couple of minutes, I'll touch on the current capabilities of AI in arbitration, also a few challenges that it poses, just to set a stage for our discussion. AI is already here, as London-based tech journalist Joanna Goodman puts it. You may or may not like your mother-in-law, but she is going to have an influence on your relationship one way or the other. I think the case with AI in arbitration is no different. The existing capabilities, when we speak about AI in arbitration, it includes document review and analysis. Document review can be time-consuming, and by using large language models and continuous active learning technology, this process can be streamlined, and also it's faster to spot issues. And we also have predictive analytics, where you're using AI to assess the likely outcome of a case. Although this enables parties to assess outcome as well as anticipate any potential challenges, because arbitration generally is confidential, the available data to train such tools might be limited, which in turn can limit the use of such AI tools. Moving on to arbitrator search, parties can make an informed decision while selecting arbitrators based on maybe average duration of proceedings or arbitrators' reasoning in a final award, but also having a large database of arbitrators could help identify potential conflict of interest. We know that such tools will only be as effective as the data it is trained on. And arbitration, again, being confidential, it is important to understand what kind of data is being used to train such tools. It would be interesting to learn if one of the experts could, touch on this in today's discussion. And also we have a speech recognition and transcription. This is definitely useful in virtual proceedings. For example, in converting transcripts or notes of a witness into witness statement in a very quick and efficient way. And research and drafting to analyze text and also maybe quickly analyze judicial treatment the issue has received in the past. And this would also give the council more time to focus on application of information rather than sourcing the information or summarizing it. And now turning to challenges, it's definitely important to talk about transparency, because when we think of generative AI, we think of black box technology, which refers to a system whose inner workings are hidden, or in this case, we don't fully understand the process that's being employed to generate information. So this could pose a challenge in arbitration when the process depends on transparency and accountability. And also the opacity of the process can reduce trust in arbitration, and also there might be concerns about the fairness of the outcome. Also, the unreliable content. Generative AI lacks clear source or accountability challenges. For example, it could fabricate information, leading to unreliable submissions. And as I mentioned earlier, that AI can only deliver results that are as good as the data it is being fed with. Data could be incomplete, confidential, or unavailable. And also, if it is incomplete or selective, whether this is done intentionally or not will still lead to some sort of unreliable or undesirable results. And it can also be trained with cases that are years old or decades old, which might not represent the type of society we currently live in. And just thinking about, in a field where accuracy and credibility is paramount, this might be a concern. For example, New York District Court this June, this year, sanctioned 2 lawyers for using bogus case citations, which were generated by ChatGPT. And this does definitely need requirement for thorough verification while relying on such tools. And also there is the challenge with confidentiality. There might be accidental disclosures. There is a recent example where a coder in Samsung put a few lines of code on ChatGPT, and this was leaked, especially when you're using models that are self-training themselves based on the feedback that the user is providing. There is a risk of breaching confidentiality when it is used in arbitration. And there are also other ethical concerns like bias and privacy. Also, to think about what next, or what would the end goal be with AI and its application in arbitration, something I thought is useful as Claudia Salomon, the president of ICC Court of Arbitration, lays out, is that there's always a demand for reducing time and cost in arbitration, and that is what AI is providing and has the potential to do further. But if all we want is something just fast and cheap, you could just toss a coin. That's also a way to solve a dispute. Yeah, maybe makes sense for something minor like picking which team gets to get the ball first, or which side of the field you get to choose. But this is the concern. We have to collectively consider how to balance demands of efficiency on one side, whereas we also have the expectation of procedural justice with the system. As technology advances, we know that regulation is sure to follow. In August this year, a task force was launched by the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center, and they released a set of draft guidelines for the public on the use of AI in arbitration. These guidelines mainly focus on ensuring competent and diligent use of AI, including disclosure of its use to the parties, as well as ensuring that the arbitrators do not delegate their decision-making power or decision-making responsibility to AI. And these guidelines have given practical illustration of what is compliant and non-compliant use of AI. This might serve as a blueprint for shaping this ethical or legal framework while governing AI in arbitration. For now, one thing is clear, is that the arbitration process cannot lose the human touch. The most exciting possibility at this point might not be replacing humans with AI, but maybe using AI to improve efficiency in arbitration. I would love to hear all your thoughts.
That was excellent. Thank you, Damini. That's wonderful. I love that cartoon. That's perfectly dead on. So No, you raise a lot of really interesting points. Sophie, actually, before we started the call, you were mentioning about a group you're working with, talking about data. Can you provide a little update on those conversations that you're having?
Yes, I mean, this is in my capacity as co-chair of the ICC task force on allegations of corruption in international arbitration. I cannot, the work is work in progress, so I cannot go into too much detail, but I can certainly say that so corruption, the whole, first of all, for context, there is no, as arbitration practitioners on this in this event will know, there is no consensus on how tribunals approach and deal with allegations of corruption in arbitration, and that's what the task force is looking at as part of. So the standard of proof, the burden of proof, the use of red flags, whether they have any evidentiary value. All of these questions are very unsettled in arbitration, surprisingly enough. As part of our work, we decided to dedicate what we call a track, which is a whole issue on whether algorithmic tools such as AI could assist in tribunals and parties in identifying and assessing red flags in a given context. So for that purpose, we have asked a group of experts, I would say mostly the AI accuracy, so the big forensic expert firms, to inform us on whether it is doable in practice to use these tools. The genesis of that thought came from the fact that those tools exist in the procurement arena. So to look for instances of abuse of public funds, those algorithmic tools have been used to great effect. And so you can see that it's not just a big leap to think of this as a way to identify red flags. And the first thing that those experts have said to us is they have said, absolutely, these tools would be great. However, when we do this exercise for our clients, we do it at the compliance stage. And so all of the data is available to us. Mm-hmm. And so we can have quite highly reliable and accurate results because we can train the algorithm on a lot of data. Now, obviously, once the arbitration has started, mm-hmm. It is a tall order to ask the parties to provide all the data that they have to the experts. The data that the tribunal can see and that the parties provide is a lot more limited. And so the first question that they asked us is, what data do you have available? And what, as a tribunal, can you do to assist us in having as much data as we can, given that you're not a court, you're an arbitration tribunal, you're limited by, the parties' autonomy, what the process provides. So that you can see immediately that although the thought of using that tool would be fantastic, in my view anyway, I think groundbreaking, and would assist very much tribunals who otherwise are a little bit at sea in trying to find red flags. In practice, what we have to give that tool to train it is something that is not easily soluble with the process as it exists. I can certainly see, and I think you told us to crystal ball, so I'm going to crystal ball.
Please, no, let's crystal ball. Absolutely.
I can certainly see a process whereby if there are corruption allegations or there are suspicions, the tribunal would be empowered quite early on to say to the parties, okay, so we're going to use this tool to look at, and so therefore you have to make available, that data. But I think that's not for an immediate consumption. I think if I put that to the task force, there's going to be a few heart attacks.
Yeah.
But you can see immediately the concept coming up against really practical challenges.
Sure.
Sorry.
No, it's fascinating. One of the things, and Damini, I really appreciate the synergy between your two presentations is resonating with me and taking me to a new point. And I'm eager to hear people's thoughts about this. A lot of the conversations I've had about AI and arbitration talk about either A, AI being an assistant to the arbitrator, helping to summarize documents and draft things, and sort of like like a senior paralegal. It's not smart enough to be able to take actions on its own. It needs to be supervised by a human, but it can definitely increase efficiency. It might be able to increase transparency, things like that. It's ways to assist the process. But Sophie, this is a very interesting thing that you're describing. It's almost like having an AI observer of an arbitration process. And I actually saw a demo when I was at the ODR forum meeting in Montreal. It was of a text-based exchange between two parties in a dispute resolution process, and they were posting messages back and forth. But when one of the parties typed in a message that was maybe a little aggressive, it had a little threat to it, it had a little, it might cross the line of being perceived as an insult. The AI actually stepped in and said, FYI, we did a tone analysis of your proposed message, and we think this could be interpreted aggressively by the other side. We've redrafted it here and taken out some of that threatening tone. Would you prefer to use your original message, or would you, prefer to use this redrafted message? And then the party could say, I'll take the redrafted message, and it would communicate that instead. It's just this notion of sort of an AI oracle monitoring the process and looking for red flags. That's a very different role for AI than this notion of kind of a sophisticated helper. They're helping the arbitrator, or synthesizing documents so as to streamline the process. Is that sort of the kind of thing that you're describing, Sophie?
I think it's not so much a different role as an added role, because obviously one of the difficulties with red flags is the volume of data available.
Right.
And what I understand from the experts is that the AI is trained to recognize patterns amongst seemingly disparate information that humans brain would not put together, but the AI can. And so it is, in that role, it is very much doing the sort of information sifting in record time and recognizing patterns. But at the same time, as you're absolutely right, it has this added sort of oversight.
Yeah.
Which again, if we're going to talk about challenges, that presents a challenge to the decision maker.
Sure.
Because if I have this sophisticated algorithm giving me this information, as a human with a human brain, inevitably I'm going to be wowed by it, right? I'm going to have, my first instinct is to believe that it's got to be accurate, right? Because this AI came up with it, and that's not necessarily the truth. And so, as an arbitrator, I want to know, how can I question this? How can I probe this in the same way that I can probe any other evidence? And that's another challenge of the use of this in arbitration.
Yeah, one of the documented aspects of social psychology is people change their behavior when they perceive that they're being watched. And there was a study of an office in the 50s that deployed a new business methodology, and it increased efficiency in the office. So they said, okay, the business methodology causes the efficiency. So then the observers left, and the office went back to its old efficiency level. And then the observers came back in, observed, and then the efficiency went back up again. And it was not the new business process. It was the fact that the workers were being watched. So it's interesting to think about, if there is an AI kind of oracle monitoring the overall process, A, how would that change the behavior of the parties and the neutrals and the arbitrators? But B, would it have a benefit even if it didn't identify any red flags? Because if the participants knew that they were using a platform that had that kind of AI monitoring, maybe they would say, look, I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going to engage in this behavior because it might be flagged by the platform, either internally for the arbitral institution, not necessarily to the parties, or even externally. Like, it could be an eventual challenge to the legitimacy of the arbitrator's award, because like, well, hey, this platform identified these potential red flags. So it's an interesting, different role for AI, one that I'd not thought of before. And Neil, it makes me think, and Sophie, I don't want to cut you off if you want to make a follow-up comment.
Please.
But Neil and I, we've had a lot of conversations about the potential for technology to help with conflict checks for arbitrators. And it would be very interesting to think about an AI that could look at potential neutrals. Damini mentioned in her proposal the idea of aiding arbitrator selection. If you could go out and look at 10,000 arbitrators and find someone whose expertise is a really good match with the case, instead of just, people calling up their friends and saying, hey, I think this person would be good for the panel. If there was an AI that could suggest people to optimize the chance that the requisite expertise would be on the arbitrator panel, But Neil and I talked also about conflict checks. I mean, there's a lot of things that an AI can do that a human, even if they took, a week to explore all of the potential relationships and past firms and past clients, they might not turn up. Neil, what do you think about this role of AI sort of as a process trust builder?
Yes, I mean, that's like definitely an interesting concept which we want to bring in with the use of AI. And I think there are multiple levels to it, in the sense, where do we use the AI observer or the AI oracle, so to say? It's great the way it is right now. I think it's great for something like conflict checks. I mean, there are like thousands of anecdotes about how in the olden days lawyers would carry separate briefcases just for conflict checks, and then you would look at all your papers to see which cases you were a part of, etc., etc. And the same thing happened with arbitrators. Now we have much more sophisticated legal software to do conflict checks, which is used by a lot of law firms, arbitral institutes, etc. But now that we have these large language models, which can do pattern recognition at a much higher level, the way Sophie was talking about, which a human cannot do. It's definitely going to help us in the process. I don't see a lot of resistance here, especially when it comes to conflict check. When it comes to case data, there will be resistance from parties about sharing it to an AI so that the AI can be trained on it or give outcomes, etc. But
Sure.
when it simply comes to checking whether you had a conflict, I think arbitrators would be open to it, attorneys would be open to it, just to make sure that, everything is all good and we don't spend like a couple of weeks in the arbitration going back and forth about whether there is a potential conflict.
Or having a piece of information turn up later that was overlooked in the conflict check process. An AI could be much more thorough and looking under every rock. Yesterday we had a call about AI and mediation. We had another Cyberweek session, and there's a lot of people that have in the ICODER standards, the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution Standards. We talk about how AI must always be under human supervision, because there's a lot of concern that AI may be biased. So if humans supervise it and they're looking at what's going on, well, maybe they'll catch that bias before it affects the platform. But this argument, this approach that Sophie talked about, and also what you're talking about, Neil, in terms of conflict checks, it's almost like we're flipping the equation, where it's like the AI is watching the human for bias, by looking at all the communications, looking at all the documents, and maybe finding worrisome patterns. So it's almost like the humans aren't watching the AI so much as the AI is watching the humans. The humans still run the process, but they know that they're in an environment that's being secured by the observation of the AI, and that may change their behavior. So it's a really intriguing idea. Yeah. So Ron, let me come to you. Let me ask your thoughts about all of this. I mean, I know you and I have spent a lot of time talking about quality metrics, and I think that that's an important thing to insert into this discussion. I think there are some applications of AI within arbitration where, if it's summarizing a document, I mean, we want to be assured that the summary is accurate somehow. But LLMs are usually pretty good at that, like taking the salient points. But if an AI is going to play a role in delivering an award, then we really need to make sure that that's a quality process. So how does your expertise on quality metrics factor into this?
That's a very open question there.
I'm trying to give you a softball to knock out of the park. Yeah.
I think first and foremost, just, taking a step back at the use and misuse of quality metrics generally, whether in any field, right? Because when they're underused, we have a lot of problems. And as we move to technology, we really do need, especially with AI, we have to train. I'll get back to that, but the overuse is also a problem. And so I think what we just need to think about is that quality metrics are think about it as I use the example of what is a good painting. And you can measure certain aspects of paintings, color distribution or line styles, and it'll correlate to some notion of a good painting for certain cases, but it's not the do all and be all. So when we measure quality outcomes in medicine, I think it's similar. Like we have certain things, but it doesn't necessarily measure like the quality of the interaction. Maybe you're just measuring the, whether you cured something, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, or, the procedural stuff. I think what we need to start getting used to is the notion of measuring where we can and identifying where we want to measure to push a market in a certain direction. So if I talk about, so and in dispute resolution, we've talked about outcome fairness, and we've talked about process fairness. And there's a role for both of those. They're difficult to measure. Measuring process fairness seems particularly challenging because it can often be some sort of a measure of empathy. But we have these tools now with the LLM, the sentiment analysis, et cetera. And I would suspect that within some few years, if not even now, we may well be able to measure the degree to which, let's say within mediation, two sides understand each other. But perhaps we want to have this little side thing going on where before an arbitrator is able to render a decision, we might want to have the AI do a little sanity check and ask the arbitrator, are you able to describe the problem as viewed by both of the sides of this dispute prior to you trying to come up with an answer?
Well, let's go back to Sophie's case. Like, she was talking about looking for red flags in the administration of an arbitration where there might be some corruption or a conflict of interest or something like that. What would be a quality metric that we could use to try and as you say, it's absolutely right. You can't change what you don't measure. So if you have KPIs that track certain things, you're creating incentives. You're creating incentives for the participants if they know that those things are going to be observed. So the quality metrics do urge a certain type of behavior based on the way that they're designed. But what do you think? I mean, we're just brainstorming here, we're spitballing, but what would be some quality metrics that you could use to achieve that particular goal within an arbitration?
There's so many different types of corruption. And I think what Sophie was talking about is, for example, misuse of funds. But I think misuse of funds isn't part of the process that we're looking at in terms of whether or not a neutral isn't actually neutral. I don't know. I mean, again, I'd go back to Sophie to say, like, for each one of these cases of corruption, you have to kind of pull out the piece that you can measure. In essence, how do I know is somebody getting money where they shouldn't? Does somebody have a connection that they're not supposed to have? And to what degree is it material or not material? There's a whole research program there to figure out the degree to which we may want to say something tends to influence decisions and some things don't. And this interesting example is a study in Israel about sentencing right before lunch or after lunch, where the sentencing got harsher and harsher until they went and had lunch and then kind of got better, got lighter again. So that's not corruption per se, but what we're talking about is weird outside influences that we want to measure. So we would be looking for like cases with different types of outcomes and try to understand, based on this huge amount of input data, is there a signal in there that led us to be suspicious of some sort of material input that we hadn't thought of? And I think that's where you're talking about the use of AI, where there's just so many pieces of data. Somebody didn't necessarily think to look at lunch, but lunch is one case, but in various types of interactions between the parties and the neutral is what we're talking about here in terms of what's corrupt.
Right. Once you see the data, you can find correlations. So yeah, I think that was how they determined that information about the severity of the decisions right
That's
before
just
lunch.
Looking at time of day, and then the pattern comes out of there.
Yeah.
So, I don't have a straightforward answer to that one. I think that a lot of it is just setting it up that corruption is a hard one in terms of we have a set of rules. They're placeholders to remove bias or to remove corruption. Where you just apply AI, what you look for is just where do we see sets of outcomes that correlated to certain types of inputs? And the system discovers that maybe somebody has a gender bias. And you weren't necessarily thinking that that was something you have to look at. But of course, if somebody has a racial bias, you really might want to limit the data that that person gets if you don't exclude them completely. But maybe we all have biases. And so by using the AI, we're kind of allocating cases to people where they have shown up to be more neutral.
Yeah. I want to widen the scope of the conversation in a minute, but I want to go back to you, Sophie. Can you just give us some examples of like what are the kinds of corruption that your task force has identified in past arbitrations? Are there categories of issues that you're focusing on?
Yes, I mean, at the moment we're looking because this is such a wide topic, and there's not even an agreement as to what. I mean, bribery is a type of corruption, of course.
Yeah.
It is the most obvious one, and so if one were to look at line items in bank statements, for example, where you have unexplained sums or sums that are disproportionately large for the service given. These are all sort of indicators that should ring alarm bells. But also, and that's verifiable by humans, right? That up to now, this is what you've done in an arbitration case as counsel. If you wanted to flag something up, this is what you would do. But the thing that the AI might assist with, the experts tell us, is more diffuse and much harder for humans to verify. Is, for example, threads of emails, types of conversations, the sort of thing that you were describing in your what you saw in Montreal, but not in the terms of an aggressive tone, but a certain way, and the types of people who interact with each other, and it's not very clear why.
Right.
This is the sort of indicia or indicators that would, I think, probably elude most humans, and the AI might help.
That's right.
But
the bank account is the proof, but the AI may sense a tone change. Or
I want to mirror
lenience.
something back as using this as an example.
Sure.
We block bribery because when someone is bribed, they're going to make a decision that is not based on the facts of the case. Okay. But when somebody thinks that if they make a decision a certain way, they're going to get a job a year from now that's high paying, that's not bribery. And it's not necessarily something that we expect to stop. And the point I'm making is by using the AI in a certain way, you start figuring out, well, it turns out if they get a job offer within 6 months, it influences their immediate decision. But if there's a job offer 5 years from now, it doesn't matter. And when you're trying to set up a guideline that says, where can somebody take a job with a prior disputant in front of them? The AI helps you to figure out where you want to draw that line because you're looking specifically to see where does it actually seem to impact outcomes or not. I'm just kind of flipping that back because we tend to go from the data, like the bribery thing, as an obvious way of influencing outcomes in an unfair way. But we can learn from the data which factors we might want to intervene on.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to widen the lens from just the corruption piece of it. Damini, you shared a couple different visions for how AI might play a role in arbitrations moving forward. So I'm going to ask all of you to look into your crystal ball here a little bit and say we're 5-10 years from now. I mean, I know that can seem like an eon in the world of tech, but what are some ways that you think artificial intelligence is going to play a role in arbitration down the road like that? Obviously, Damini, you detailed things that are happening right now where AI is potentially coming into the room. And I want to talk about some of the ethical ramifications and regulatory ramifications of some of those things, whether or not we need to be transparent about the fact that AI is already in the room. But let's first do some prognostication. Do we think human arbitrators are going to go the way of the dinosaur? Are we going to have more and more cases resolved directly by algorithms? Will the parties prefer algorithms due to efficiency and cost? Or is there going to be always a human role to be played by the arbitrator, and technology is going to play more of an assisting role? And how are party expectations around what they want from an arbitration going to change as algorithms become more robust and become more mainstream in the culture? So who has an idea about where this may be headed, a few years out? Sophie?
I don't, I can't claim to have an idea. If the EU has its way with its proposed AI Act, the human will very much remain in the loop. Just for context, the AI Act, the proposed AI Act of the EU, which obviously is going to apply in the EU, but I think the EU is sort of trying to put forward a gold standard for the
bellwether. Everyone else
and
will
safety
follow.
of AI.
Yeah.
And it adopts a risk sort of measurement mechanism where you have prohibited AI. So, for example, anything to do with facial recognition or features to give social benefits, for example, that's prohibited. And then you have high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And amongst the list of high risk uses of AI is the use of AI in judicial settings.
Sure.
And so therefore, ergo, arbitral settings as
But
well.
mainly, I think they're talking about criminal settings, right? Civil cases are
Mostly
less
criminal
so dangerous.
settings, but the act does not single out criminal settings. It said generally in the decision making by judges,
right?
That should remain very much. And if AI is being used, then very high settings are required in terms of transparency, safety, privacy, this whole thing.
Absolutely.
That's the proposal anyway. So my thinking is that in the next 10 years, the human will have to remain involved as we take baby steps. What I would personally see is that there is actually, I think, no reason why algorithms should not be trained and able to decide the simpler cases, the volume cases. And there is already evidence out there that the users of justice systems, of dispute resolution, will, if they get a result that they consider is fair enough, does not cost them the earth, and is done within a short time frame, they're going to learn to trust it.
Absolutely.
And if they trust it, and trust is at the very center of arbitration. And if they trust the technology and they trust the outcome, they will adopt it for those cases.
Absolutely.
Now, that does not mean that other types of more complex, nuanced cases will not remain very much within the realm of what we have now, perhaps aided in the way that Damini was explaining by AI to streamline certain things. But it offers more options to the users of dispute resolution. And I think that can only be a good thing.
Well, in $1 billion case, there's plenty of space for both algorithmic and human participants, because there's plenty of money at question. But for a low dollar value case, as you say, the parties may say it's perfectly adequate to have if an AI can come in, analyze the information submitted, and render a decision, and both parties say, yep, that seems reasonable. I mean, they would probably have the ability to appeal it to a human arbitrator if they so desire. But I think, as you say, this is a trust question. And I think a lot of the regulations the EU is considering are happening in a context where people don't yet have trust of these AIs. But as we have more and more experience, and then we say, wow, look, objectively, we've looked at 1,000 cases, and it actually does a fairer job. We don't have the blood sugar issue that Ron identified before. I could easily see in 5 or 10 years where the parties would prefer an algorithmic arbitrator in some cases, because they feel like it's more examined, it's more auditable, it's more transparent, it's less vulnerable to bias. So, another one, I'm going to throw this out, but I want others to weigh in also with their prognostication. Do we think that AI is going to play a role in evaluating the credibility of evidence, not only submitted documentary evidence, but maybe even evaluating the testimony of witnesses? There's a lot of things that AI can do in reading vocal inflections and temperature readings on faces, and even looking at the transcription of text and maybe finding inconsistencies. Is that something that we think is going to be normalized, or because right now I think that's kind of in the ick zone for people? Like I don't want an AI to watch my video testimony and then give me a score about how credible it finds me. But what do people think about that, and then other possibilities as well as to where we'll be 5 or 10 years from now? I'm tempted to cold call. All right, Neil, you came off mute, so that means you go.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, this is one of the use cases of AI technology, which is going to face a lot of resistance. And I think it's going to take a while to normalize. And in some cases, it may not normalize at all. Like right now, I mean, pretty recently, Zoom itself launched so many different AI features like the AI companion, the AI summary, and we can enable it. And then the entire meeting can be recorded by AI and it can provide a summary later, or it can look back into everything that was spoken in the meeting. And we can ask it questions about, oh, was this particular topic addressed in this meeting? But there is still a lot of resistance to it because not everyone is comfortable with having an AI observe you to that extent, looking out for every sentence that you're saying. And well, if it had to even examine the tone that you're using, that's taking it to a whole other level. So I think such uses will come along, but it's going to take time. And I think different jurisdictions will have different policies about this. I can see the EU having a policy which is more in favor of the parties to the arbitration, which allows the parties to decide completely whether or not they want any form of AI examination of testimony, evidence, etc. Whereas I see certain other jurisdictions, whether it's India, whether it's US, which are a little bit more open. But to slightly move in a tangent, because this is what I was thinking about, what's going to happen 5 years from now when we look at all these technologies. I think we are going to start bringing in some additional human rights in terms of AI, in terms of, do we have access to AI? Should we have a right of access to an AI technology? Because we know it's here. We know there are like different open source or free versions of it available to everyone, but the best versions are still within the hands of certain companies or within the hands of, let's say, if the government invests in it. And
Right.
definitely ADR institutions and law firms are all going to develop the best possible AI tools to use during all the legal processes. But if I look at just on ordinary people, or if I look at myself as a consumer or as an employee, how do I get access to the best AI tool that I can use and figure out what are the outcomes of my case, or what is the evidence that is there? And I think this is something that governments will have to take notice of, that we are going to have to start thinking about how to make sure that everyone has access to a reliable AI tool, whether it is driven by a large language model or whether it is driven by a different set of machine learning algorithms. That's to be seen. But I see a right to AI coming along.
I think it's an excellent point. We already have an asymmetry in many arbitrations between, say, a consumer participant and a business participant, because the business has tools that the consumer doesn't have access to, and they've been through many of these cases, and it creates an unlevel playing field. So we have to do a systems design to try and restore that balance. So I think you make a good point, Neil. I think every law firm is going to make their own AI, and they're going to feed it at their own data, and that's going to become a huge asset. For that, I'm going to go with this firm because they have such a powerful AI and they can suck in so much data and they can do a good job. So maybe this is just a new arms race, between participants in these processes. But I think it's an excellent point. Yeah. Do you have any comments about that? Or other prognostications, Sophie?
I mean, the law firms are already doing it, right?
Right.
They're already deploying their own equivalent of ChatGPT, which is called Harvey, which they feed with their proprietary information. I'm just thinking, I read in today's papers that OpenAI is now selling applications,
That's right.
and a little bit like the Apple Store, for example, called GPTs, which you can buy and then customize to help with. And I wonder whether that's not the start of what Neil is talking about, which is a right to AI, and makes it accessible to a greater number. So that you don't need your own AI, your own AI department to have access to some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Altman is saying everybody's going to have their own little instance that they can train and educate, and it's going to create millions potentially of GPTs. And so, will it level the playing field? I don't know. I mean, obviously, institutions can train their GPTs with a lot more information than an individual consumer, but maybe there are ways consumers can team up and feed information and then make use of it. I mean, 5 or 10 years from now, are we going to see a situation I mean, we keep talking about AIs serving as arbitrators, but I could also see a circumstance where parties choose AIs to act as their advocates and then essentially empower that AI with all the information they have about the case. And then the AI goes off and negotiates their case for them. And potentially it would be an agent representing each side in front of another AI that's evaluating the case. I know I've just written an article on crowdsourcing, and I could see there a case would be submitted to 100 AIs. Maybe different organizations around the world have all trained their GPTs. And if you have $1 million dispute, you could request 40 of those GPTs to come in and evaluate the case. Whoever gets a majority of the GPTs to agree that they should win, they win the case. I mean, again, that's a vision for not one all-seeing eye of ChatGPT that has all the information in it. Instead, everyone's going to be making their GPTs, and then we can select, just like we choose a panel of arbitrators, we could select GPTs from different representative organizations, and then whoever gets a majority to agree with them. That may provide a more procedurally defensible process than just one AI evaluating the case. So any other prognostications? I mean, look, the good news about predicting the future is we're not going to come check you in 10 years to tell you if you're wrong. So if you have any crazy ideas, now's the time to vet them.
I just want to highlight that I think technology impacts a lot of fundamental aspects of law. And in this case, the procedures that we go through, I think, are going to have to change. We're used to certain ways of doing things, but as we're going to start injecting more and more AI information to a person, we're probably going to, we're already talking that certain cases are just more amenable to it. I mean,
Right.
E-commerce is an example, but there's a lot of cases where we're going to, we tend to ignore the people that don't get their cases resolved and think that somehow we can just focus on quality as the do-all and the end-all for dispute resolution, and it's not fair to people.
Mm-hmm.
So, to some degree, we want more cases resolved more quickly, and if you inject in that process, it's automatically resolved with the right to a human appeal. That's a different notion of what arbitration is.
I could not agree with you more. I think arbitration is changing technology. Obviously, we're designing tools to fit into arbitration, but technology is changing arbitration. And one of the things right now, if you have a low dollar value case, how many documents are you're going to submit? An arbitrator is not going to spend more than an hour or two on your case. But maybe in the future, people will just, here's everything. This is all my emails. This is all of our correspondence. These are our phone calls. They just upload the whole thing because an LLM can chew through all of that, for pennies. So definitely the technology is going to change fundamentally the arbitration process. But so hopefully the changes will underscore people's trust in that process.
But another aspect of arbitration, it kind of comes up peripherally, has to do with enforcement. And the courts and arbitrators tend to want to get out of a dispute as quickly as they can, come to a decision, and really kind of loathe the notion that they're continually involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you have the software checking compliance with the regulation down the road, and you're setting it up so like, okay, well, you have to conform to these rules, and these rules are injected in some system that can just constantly make sure that that's being followed.
Sure.
That may well change some of the remedies that are more easily available to a neutral.
Well, that makes me think of smart contracts too, where enforcement is built into the contract mechanism itself.
And in a contract mechanism, that's true. But with, for example, child custody, there may well be ways of checking the position, where the location of the child and whether they're getting places on time. And that means that a neutral has a little more ability to come up with more creative solutions to things.
Right. Automated enforcement. So I want to open it up for other people's comments, but the last thing I want to ask, there's so many topics that we could address, and I surfaced a bunch of different questions I'm looking through. I just want to talk to you all about, or hear from you about some of the challenges you think are coming, some of the ethical concerns, some of the transparency concerns. Sophie, you mentioned before the EU is the EU normally takes a heavier hand in terms of regulating new technologies than the United States, where we just release it in the marketplace and we see what happens, and usually deal with the deleterious effects down the stream. But how do you feel about what guardrails do you think we need to put in place, and what are the dangers if we don't put effective guardrails in place with the use of AI?
So I'm going to answer that by looking at the EU's approach in comparison with the approach in the United Kingdom, which is where I'm based. So talking about what I know, where the United Kingdom, they just had an AI summit, and essentially their approach has been to say, oh, we do not want to stifle innovation. That's their tagline. And so therefore, we are going to leave it to the various regulators of industries, so the Law Society for lawyers, whatever other organization for accountants, to do what they need to do.
Kind of the industry associations have to figure it out.
Yes, free market. But the problem with that, of course, is that it is we're going to be dealing with a very fragmented landscape of soft law that is not going to be enforceable readily,
right,
and that can contradict each other. And I although I quite understand no stifling, I also applaud the EU's approach in the sense that it has made it very clear what is and is not acceptable. And so, for example, the human in the loop for the EU remains, and again, that may change in due course as the technology matures, but the human in the loop remains a very important thing. Whereas as things stand in the UK, it's a whole lot of nothing. So I think that given the concerns that exist and the fact that we don't know very much about this technology at all just yet, perhaps a little bit of not a heavy hand, but a little bit of a structure is a better idea. The other thing I wanted to say just before I stop is for the future, I think a real question, it's a bit of a metaphysical question, it's an important one, is I think a big question is being asked to lawyers generally or practitioners of the law, what the meaning of legal knowledge is in the age of algorithm. I mean, what does it mean to be knowledgeable in the law? And what value added does that provide when you have a machine that is full of information, relevant information, and that is able to set it out in a way that sounds logical. And that, I think, is a real question to which I don't have an answer.
Yeah, one of the things that I do worry about is bad actors creating AIs where they're essentially tweaking the data set to put their thumb on the scale, like they intentionally introduce bias to benefit one side, but then they represent that AI as being neutral. And how much transparency do we have in just a free market situation? We've had a couple cases in the United States where vendors have created AIs that they argue are objective, that provide good outcomes. But then people say, well, I want to see the data that you're using to train your AI. And those companies say, no, we're not going to share that. That's proprietary. So I do worry that gets back to what Damini said in her presentation about the black box aspect of this. I think that, you know, we all want to build systems that can withstand that kind of auditing and transparency. But I could see that there are bad actors who don't share that incentive. And it'll be very hard to tell the good actors from the bad actors.
Exactly. There's nothing to catch them. Exactly.
Nothing to catch them. Yeah. So the EU, I mean, I have to say, as an American, I like the let 1,000 flowers bloom approach. But I will say, we had a meeting in 2000 at the beginning of the ODR field. And essentially all the regulators said, well, we're just going to let people make their own decisions. And essentially what that meant is industry didn't do anything. So, you know, it sort of shifts responsibility onto the marketplace, but the marketplace is not the best steward for that responsibility. So what do other people think about that in terms of concerns, guardrails, you know, some potential challenges moving forward with a greater role for AI in the arbitration process?
You know, we assume that humans are neutral, but we don't necessarily measure the degree to which that's true, and technology forces all kinds of measurements.
That's true.
So having some quality metrics around neutrality is really important, and I'm glad that that's going to be pushing forward. The AI will force us to measure that with humans. I just feel like it really has a lot more to do with the changes in process, so that we are always able to appeal. And I think we don't like the thought of appeal because it seems so heavyweight, but as the AI or the technology is able to get to the first line resolution reasonably accurately, the appeal process is more appropriate. So
yeah, I agree with you. I think it's interesting to think about if we have a human or an algorithmic resolution, to have multiple other AIs that could evaluate the same fact set and then say, well, because right now when an arbitrator makes a decision, it's like, is that the right or the wrong decision? Well, I don't know. You know, we don't really have anything to measure it against. But it's an intriguing thing to think about having multiple AIs that could evaluate that same data set and say, well, how does it agree or disagree with the decision that was rendered? I also want to say, people often say they look at technology-based processes and they evaluate them against the ideal arbitration process. But the reality of arbitration around the world is there's a lot of corruption. I mean, we had a case in Los Angeles where, you know, there was payola. I mean, it wasn't direct payola during the case, but as soon as the decision was rendered, the party that benefited, they took that panel of arbitrators on a cruise in the Mediterranean for 2 weeks. You know, it just stinks to high heaven, right? But the fact is, we can do better.
I'm practicing in the wrong country.
Well, you know, come on over to California. You'll get some free trips, Sophie. But, you know, the reality is we don't have a perfect arbitration system now. You know, we're slouching towards greatness, but there's a lot of work that we have to do. So we need to compare the pluses and minuses of algorithmic assisted arbitrations against the reality of what currently is going on, as opposed to the ideal of the way that we think is going on, where all the arbitrators are neutral and they all evaluate information rationally and without bias. And I'm not sure that that's happening. We know a couple cases, we're gathering more information on arbitrations in the US and abroad, where the process is really, an algorithmic arbitrator may give us more opportunities to have transparency and trustworthy outcomes, because you can't take the AI on a, well, you probably could take the AI on a Mediterranean cruise, but it wouldn't particularly care as long as the electricity is consistent. So other thoughts, Damini, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, just to wrap it up, I think Damini and I discussed this a little bit yesterday, and we were thinking about AI versus humans and how there are a lot of flaws when we have humans in the process, because humans are fallible. There can be bias, there can be temptation, there can be corruption, etc. But to an extent, we are okay with some of these things because we trust the human to not, you know, be fall prey to such other extraneous concerns, so to say. But when it comes to the AI, we are going to always hold it to a much higher standard. In, like Ron was saying, we may not be able to measure the bias in a human, but now with an AI tool, we can, in a way, measure the bias that it may have. So it's always going to be held to a higher standard, and that's in a way a challenge to deploying AI, but also, you know, one of the good things, because we are elevating the standards. And Damini, please feel free to add on.
Yeah, Damini.
I just think end of the day, it also heavily depends on how we as a society, how fast or slow we are at just accepting AI in our justice system and giving the decision-making power to an AI. Based on how, as a society, how long or how fast we do it, that would have a greater impact. I mean, we have regulation on one side, but this we as a society will play a role as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. I feel like it's happening much faster than I ever expected. Much like the adoption of video mediation, it just happened because of the pandemic. ChatGPT 4, I mean, boom. Everyone is like, okay, this is the new reality. Let's bring AI in. It's like, wow, that was a big shift. Yeah, Tino, did you want to say something before I know you need to leave? You want to go to the other session, right?
Well, I've got a meeting, but this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad I had opportunity to attend. Lots to think about. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's great. I feel the same way. I don't want it to end, but I think we need to respect, especially it's getting late for Sophie. Sophie, do you have a final comment you want to wrap us up with?
Thank you for giving me the last word. I just wanted to say that we need to keep thinking about the question of trust. I think trust is absolutely central. Also, the question in my mind after this great conversation is, you know, the AI can be biased. The human mind is certainly not free of bias, of which unconscious bias. And I wonder really if we should not be working towards the optimal partnership between the machine and the human in decision-making, so as to not eliminate, I think it's utopian to eliminate bias, but certainly to try to neutralize as much as possible on both sides. It may be that the AI as oversight is a way forward, as we were discussing. I don't have a clear answer, but that's really the takeaway from for me from this conversation.
Well, you remember they say
thank you.
humans make mistakes, but it takes computers to really foul things up.
I was thinking sort of the yin and yang of the human and the computer. The black invades the white and the white invades the black, and it spins around. So, well, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you all for taking the time. And I will edit up the video and post it on the agenda for those who weren't able to join us live. But thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Damini. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Neil. We're going to figure this all out together. And if I harbor any bias, it's towards all of you. So have a great rest of your evening, and we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.